now, from the great state of Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, it's the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Brought to you by ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. ETP Canada. And Tom's Place, for the finest in men's fashion. Tom's Place will suit you. And now, here's Ted.
Thanks so much, Becky, and thank you all for tuning in. Welcome to another edition of the Ted Wallachin Podcast. For past programs, episodes, we suggest you go to www.tedwallachin, WOLOSHYN.ca, and you will find all of our past episodes. And there are links to our sponsors as well. And we would certainly appreciate if you showed them the generosity that they show us, because without them, we're not here. So you're, in that case, not listening to anything. Well, not with me in it anyway. So if you do that, that'd be great. And, we love doing, giving people an opportunity to meet people from various walks of life who do more than one thing simultaneously. I'm always impressed by people who can multitask. And my guest this week is a producer. He's a comedian, an actor, and a writer. In fact, he is a producer of the upcoming Danforth Comedy Festival, which happens August 4th through the 6th and 11th through the 12th. He has recorded his first album, comedy album, last year. And of all the comedians I've interviewed, I've never spoken to anybody who's performed on stage with his father. He'll tell us about that. Welcome to the program, Luke Lynndale. It is a pleasure meeting you, sir. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Big show coming up. A couple of weekends in August 4th and to the 6th, and the August 11th and 12th at the Danforth Comedy Festival. We'll talk about that a little bit later once we get into the show. But I want to talk a little bit about you for those people who are not familiar with one Luke Lynndale. You're originally from Quebec.
That's
born
right.
and raised in Lachine and Longueuil, right?
That's right. I grew up on the South Shore of Montreal, Longueuil, yeah. I would say I think the majority of the South Shore now is Longueuil, but not when I was there. But yeah, that's where I'm from. Mm-hmm.
And when did you decide that comedy was something that you were interested in? Was it at a young age, or did you wait until you were a little bit more mature before? I know you got into it back in '93, but
That's
were
right.
you possessed by comedy as a young kid?
Well,
so many comedians are?
Well, I think growing up, my mom died when I was young, and I grew up in a French neighborhood where being English was a little bit more difficult to make friends. So I was stuck being very friendly with my TV. I watched a lot of Carol Burnett
Yeah.
and a lot of Andy Griffith and a lot of other kind of sitcoms. Happy Days was popular, and those kind of things. And
Yeah.
and then I think as I got older, I went to university and did that. I did some plays in high school, a couple plays, and then after when I graduated university, there wasn't a lot of job opportunities. I kind of graduated into a recession at the time,
Mhm.
and I don't know. I just thought I would try something different. Took a course at the Comedy Works, and just love the rush of being on stage and everything.
Is that you studied at McGill University?
I studied actually at Concordia. I studied applied
Concordia?
mathematics.
Applied mathematics. And
That's
you have
right.
your Bachelor of Science degree?
That's right. Exactly.
And explain to me the significance of that is later on in your career as you end up doing some work at TSN, the sports
Mm-hmm.
network, in the fantasy sports department.
Yeah. Well, what happened is Bell Globe Media had given a bunch of money to TSN. They had recently purchased TSN. They wanted to start a site called TSN Max, where they were going to have people pay for more content. At that time, that was the big nut to crack. The beginning of the sort of like internet, the internet boom, I guess.
Yeah.
And then what happened is I ended up working there. I was doing customer service for them, and then I was there while the internet crashed, I guess, in 2000. And TSN, there was a shift, and fantasy sports at that time was pretty popular. And I took over and was a product manager for fantasy sports, and I ran that division. And we were the first ones to actually do fantasy sports for the CFL. That never been done before.
Really?
And that's still being done today. So that's kind of like an interesting side note to what I've done.
Now, are you involved in fantasy sports at all at this point, even as a hobby?
As a hobby, a little bit. At that time, I was one of those really maniac people. I remember I was on Yahoo Sports before I worked at TSN. I had something like 18 teams. I would get up at 7 in the morning and switch all my players and so on. It
Good
was really
Lord.
it was practically a part-time job to my full-time job. In the morning, up early, and after work looking at trades, and it was a bit crazy.
Do you wager on sports at all? I don't want me to get too personal, but it's not a personal thing anymore. I
Yeah.
mean, my God,
uh,
it's all over the TV, right?
I don't. I mean, right now, comedy for me is all encompassing. I mean, I have a family. I'm married with a 12-year-old daughter. That's pretty time consuming as well. So between those two pieces, I really don't have time. My wife and daughter, we did a pool for the football season, right? Or we did a couple small things, but nothing. I don't gamble on sports. No.
No, no. Your daughter's 12 years old. What does she think about her dad and what he does for a living?
Did she? It's interesting for her. It's more on the sort of technical side in a sense, because I run a bunch of shows, and so like during the week, sometimes leading up to a show, we'll have like bets around, how many tickets you think we're going to sell for this show, that kind of stuff. She finds that interesting. Or I'll come back and she'll remember. I'll make a comment about a comedian was really funny that night, or something else, and then 3 weeks later she'll ask about that person. Right? She kind of knows them in that sense. She finds that part interesting, but
Right.
specifically me, she doesn't really kind of care too much. I don't think at this point.
But has she seen you perform either live or on video, because a lot of your stuff's available on YouTube, and of course you
Well,
recorded an album last year,
yeah,
and your stuff could be a little colorful in nature.
it can be colorful. Yes, yes, it can be.
Which, okay, I'm not passing judgment. I'm just saying,
No, it can
uh,
be. Yeah.
because it's like one of those things. It's well, Daddy, you talk like this all the time when you're on the stage. Yeah, but you can't do that.
Well, I'll say this. I think, like, so, being from Montreal, growing up, swearing and having inside voices and so on were not something that's really was part of my upbringing in Quebec. You kind of say what you feel like, and if you swear, it's just a way of speaking, not necessarily directed at anyone. So I still speak that way at home sometimes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I understand that. It's interesting. There was a story in the paper a couple of years ago. It came out in I think in the paper, wherever it came from, but some researchers had done some work and decided that people who swore were not necessarily lacking in vocabulary, and in many cases, people who swore were more intelligent than those people who didn't swear,
Well,
which I thought was
I
a
don't know.
fascinating story. And I thought, well, really?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes people think, well, a comedian swears on stage because they don't have anything else to fill with, right? Or people swear
Well, I
because
yes, I mean,
they only have a certain limited vocabulary.
I certainly agree that that can be the case. I feel like for me, a lot of the times, and this is what I always telling people, like, for me, it's more that I'm passionate in the moment. So when I write things out, there's no swearing in what I write. But if
Right.
I'm upset in the moment in what I'm talking about, then that comes out. That can come out.
Well, and not to get too fine a point on it, but there's a big difference between swearing, using profane language, and swearing in terms of cursing. You know
Exactly.
what I'm saying? Like if you're
Yeah.
if you're telling a story about, like, you tell a story about a colonoscopy that you went through, which is very funny, and you drop the f bomb a number of times, and that's cool too. But you're not doing it. You're not pointing at anybody and calling them, well, you effing this, or you
Yeah.
you know. So
Exactly.
it's not done in a harmful way. So there's a difference between being mean spirited and just being humorous and happen to be colorful.
Exactly. And well, to actually, to go back to what you were saying about my daughter. So what happened was, um, during the pandemic, my daughter heard me quite often. I did actually quite a lot of Zoom shows, and
Yeah,
one
yeah.
one thing I didn't take into account was that, I have a loud voice, and I was getting upset about things or whatever, and that she was obviously in the house, because we were on lockdown and so on. And then I remember a number of times I would come upstairs after they're on the second floor, and I would ask, like, "Oh, did you hear any of that?" And they were like, "We heard all of that." We heard every second of that. And sometimes I would speak about my daughter or my wife in detail, And so they've my daughter's heard a lot of my
Yeah.
act during the pandemic. Yes.
Well, then she's matured beyond her age, no doubt.
she has matured in ways that we didn't expect. Yes.
I read it, and I don't recall what the number was, but you did, like you mentioned, you did a bunch of Zoom shows. You did a lot more than a bunch, like dozens and dozens, if I can recall correctly.
Well, I gave myself a challenge, actually. I decided at one point I was going to produce my own, because producing Zoom shows wasn't really that overly difficult once you got the hang of Zoom, And
Yeah.
I decided I did 50 in 3 weeks at one point.
Wow.
I thought I thought to myself, I want to see if they really are as awful and brutal as everyone's saying, right? Like, what if we did 50? What if that did that kind of thing? So I tried that.
And how long are these things?
They were like an hour and a half each.
Just by yourself?
Oh no! It was a proper show. Like, I mean, in the sense
Okay,
that,
you're filling an entire program, because I'm thinking, how the hell do you come up
no.
with that kind of material? This man's crazy.
No, and in some cases you're repeating some of the same material, of course,
Yeah.
And probably the most time I probably would have done in any of them would be 15 minutes. Maybe I did between 10 and 15 minutes in each of those shows.
Right.
Yeah.
And your material is mostly observational, right?
Yeah, observational, I'd say. Yeah, about my life and the kind of crazy world we live in.
Does politics seep into your comedy? Because there was I'll give you an example, Luke. There was a time when you could watch, like, the Tonight Show, which Johnny Carson was hosting it, and Johnny Carson would take shots at the Republicans and the Democrats. And then when Trump moved into the White House, suddenly every talk show host, because they're all stand-up comics,
Yeah.
every one of them are doing jokes at Trump, about Trump. Nobody's taking a shot at the Democrats at all.
Yeah, it's very.
And I thought, not that I'm a Trump fan, but I'm thinking, well, that's kind of one-sided, and after a while, got to be a little bit boring and predictable.
I agree. I think so. For me at the moment, once I got back into stand-up, I decided I wanted to create sort of more general material to start, to kind of have a good, like to have a good base of that. I think over time, talking about more topical things, including politics, is something I'm going to go into. But at the moment, I don't really talk about that.
Yeah.
But I do agree there's ridiculousness, whether you're on the right or the left or in the middle or wherever you are. We are all people, and we do silly things, and there's lots to pick at and lots to choose from.
Ted Wallachin returns in a moment.
Hey, it's Ted Wallachin for Tom's Place. Our fall merchandise is starting to arrive, and we've got massive amounts of summer clothing that needs to be cleared. Blowout prices on virtually everything, like designer suits, regularly up to $5.99, now from $167 to $267. Beautiful sports jackets, starting at only $167, and designer dress pants and shirts, all at $67. Check out our deals throughout the store on the very best of designer menswear. Huge savings off our already below retail prices. If you need a suit for an upcoming wedding or any special occasion, we are Toronto's one-stop suit shop. For the finest outfit for every occasion, there is no better time to find the perfect addition to your wardrobe. Everything is on sale to make way for our fall merchandise. Tom's Place is open 11 to 6 weekdays, 10 to 5 Saturday, 12 to 5 Sunday. Visit Tom's Place, 190 Baldwin in Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. Have you been tasked with the role of a state executor, or expected maybe in the future you will be? Well, if so, let me make your life a lot simpler by introducing you to my friend Debbie Stanley. Debbie is the founder of ETP Canada. They specialize in estate administration. Their goal simply is to help Canadian executors understand their role and how to deal with the loved one's estate. Let's face it, there's no school for this, but ETP Canada offers services such as executor support, estate accounting, and they have a new online course called Executor Ready. It's an engaging video designed to make estate administration easier and affordable. And those are two comforting thoughts during a stressful time. So call Debbie Stanley at 1-866 309-0387. That's 1-866-309-0387. Or you can get her at info@etpcanada.ca. That's info@etpcanada.ca.
Give it up for Luke Lynndale, everybody.
How's you enjoying the weather with that fucking bullshit, eh? Enjoying that? You know what I don't like about this kind of weather is on the news when they tell you it feels like minus 14. Drop the fucking minus feels like shit. Drop the feels like it's minus 14. That's what it is. When you punch someone in the face, it doesn't feel like it hurts. It hurts. It fucking hurts. It's hurting me. Stop punching me. It hurts.
You touched on it very briefly, and I'll get into in a little bit more detail now. You started doing your stand-up routine back in 1993. You graduated from Second City's sketch program, and sketch comedy and improv is totally different than stand-up comedy. And as you mentioned, Montreal School of Performing Arts as well, you graduated from there. But you started stand-up in 93, and then you stopped about 5 years later, 1998.
Yeah.
You got into improv in 2010, and then in 2017, after 19 years away from stand-up, you decided to go back to stand-up.
That's right.
Now, I can see that being difficult for two reasons. Number one, you're rusty as hell.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, it's like, well, I got to prove myself all over again. Everything that I've done in the past, it's like I have no history.
That's right. I think getting back into stand-up is probably the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. It's so, like you said, I think the biggest challenge I had was two things. One is me thinking I was as good as I was when I stopped, which of course I wasn't because I had stopped. And then the second thing was getting back to that level and not knowing anyone anymore, right? Or like, of the people that were remaining, they either had moved up and were doing amazingly well, and of course I was at the bottom again, or so many people had just gone on and moved on and to do other things.
Was it more difficult beginning your career as a stand-up or coming back to a career as a stand-up?
Oh, coming back 100% because
because of those reasons.
Yeah, because you would show up places and you would be like, I've had this duality. I mean, it still exists, not as much now, but this duality of like this idea of who I thought I was or who I am, but I'm not that, you know? So I was always fighting against this kind of like this idea that I had in the past. And I always kept having to remind myself, I'm not that guy, you know, I'm not him, you know, I'm whoever I am in this moment, you know, this is who I am.
I used to do stand-up, and I remember when I first started doing it, that it was difficult when you failed, and inevitably everybody fails at one point. I mean, when you're starting off, but you take it in stride because you think to yourself, well, I know I'm going to make mistakes. I know I'm going to have bad nights. I know I'm going to fail. And then failure becomes less and less and less and less and less. But now when you come back and you think to yourself, wait a minute, I did this for so many years and I attained such a level, reached such a level. And now failure feels like 5 times worse than it did the first time.
Well, yeah, I think, but also in a way for me, it didn't, only because I had a different view on things when I came back. I think the first time when I did it, I really had this sort of desire of, you know, being famous, being discovered, etc., moving to the States, all this kind of idea. And then when I got back into it, and I'd done improv, when I started back in 2010, I did only improv for 7 years. And during that period, then when I started to do stand-up again, it was more sort of like, you know, I'm going to do it, and if it goes well, it's fine. It was very low stakes, and so it was very. And I always kind of thought like, well, if it doesn't go well, I can just quit again, you know, because I did it before.
And there was a time that you and your dad performed together as, cleverly enough, entitled Duo Dad.
That's right.
Duo Dad. Duodad. Doing sketch and improv. Did your dad have a history of comedy? I mean, do you just drag him by the ear and say, "Okay, come on, old man, we're doing this together"?
Well, actually, what happened was he was probably the reason I got back into doing comedy again, like doing improv. So my dad, I remember when I started doing stand up in Montreal, he would come and watch me at the Comedy Works. He taught he was a professor at Concordia University at night, but he taught in a high school during the day. And he'd come and watch me there. But then later, after I'd moved to Toronto, he moved as well. And he ended up living in our basement. My wife and I, when we bought a house, he lived in the basement. And at one point, he decided he wanted to take courses to have better public speaking. So I suggested maybe he should take courses at the Second City.
Right.
And then he did that. And then invariably he would come home after the course and he would be so frustrated. He'd be like, yeah, we're just standing around in a circle pointing at each other like this thing, like why are we doing that kind of garbage? Like I don't understand. So every time he'd come home, I'd explain to him, well, you're doing that exercise for this reason. Like it's not actually garbage. It's actually get you connected, et cetera, or whatever. And I was explaining to him that. And then as I did that, I thought to myself at one point, maybe I'll try it again, And I started right back to the beginning and took courses, and I went back to take courses at the Second City. So it was kind of because of him that I got back into it. And then we took a course together at one point. And, you do scenes with other people in the course. And at one point we ended up doing a scene together. Well, the teacher just loved it. It was so silly because we knew each other sort of, like I knew how to sort of bug him or get him aggravated or whatever. I would do that for fun, because I thought it was hilarious. And my dad would be kind of unaware that I was doing it and would play right into it. And so that's how that started.
Would you ever see the day that you and your daughter do that?
Well, actually, yeah, my daughter actually during the pandemic, we actually had her. I did a show called the Lynndale Show at one point. I was doing it weekly, and my dad was on the show as well. My dad was still living in the basement during the pandemic. He's moved into a seniors home now, but and my daughter was on the show as well. And
cool.
We had like a segment with her, like doing an interview with her. And so,
what's tougher, improv or stand up?
Geez, that's a great question. I think both of them can be super difficult. I think it's all about mindset. It's all about if you have the right mindset. I think, ironically, I found like the commonality between both of them, which is a weird thing to say about comedy, is don't try to be funny, like in the sense of like don't try to force it, to kind of like trying to be funny where something is not funny in a sense.
But at least with improv, there are people you can lean on, and if you're having an off night and the other 2 or 3 people in your group aren't, then you can save the evening. If you're having an off night as a stand-up comic, it's just you.
Well, that's true. However, if the other improvisers are brutal, like that can be,
they can drag you down.
Yeah. So there's kind of pros and cons to both, right? I think both can be exhilarating, but you're right. I mean, I think that for me, the biggest magic, whether it's stand-up or improv, is really the improvised part of it where, we're in a room live with other people. We don't know that something's going to happen. And I think in improv, there's like that eureka when the performers on stage and the audience all see something happening in the same moment. And we know that it wasn't planned, right? It just happened in this moment and it all came together and we all saw it at the same time. Like but that's the same thing when stand-up talks to the audience, right? When you do riffing or you're doing crowd work, same sort of idea.
Yeah, I suppose. And then there's sketch comedy, which really is a combination of your acting chops and your ability to be funny, because like there's a lot of great actors out there who can't do comedy films.
Yeah,
but I would suggest that the ones who can do comedy can do drama easier than the ones who can do drama. It's easier to go from comedy to drama than drama to comedy, I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I think that comedians see the world in a certain way and they can laugh at it. But at the same time, obviously, we're aware if something is very serious that we can take it seriously as well. But we can see the humor in everything. There's humor, right? But maybe it's inappropriate at times, which to a comedian
exactly. It's like the whole thing, when it's what is it that philosophy where timing and
distance,
whatever something equals humor. Do you know the adage I'm talking about?
Yeah. Well, distance, like if you're far enough away from it, because if like someone dies and then you make like that's the idea of saying it's too soon.
Yeah,
like it's like not enough time.
Like the pandemic, right? It's like the pandemic is still one of those things with COVID, right? I mean, everybody knows somebody who either died or was really sick from COVID.
Yeah,
and yet comedians still manage to find a way to find humor out of the whole deal, just like comedian, like there's, I don't know who you know, Marla Lakowski, the comedian, right? Well, she battled cancer for years, right? And
Mhm.
she turned that into part of her routine. I mean, she also speaks about it seriously, but she managed to bring it in to show the humorous side of it
Oh, well,
because she was talking about herself.
there's such a fine line between tragedy and comedy, of course, right? I mean, and
Yeah,
that's what makes things funny. That's why I don't know, like someone trips and falls, and in a certain scenario,
yeah,
it's funny until they break their leg, right? Like,
that's right.
or they get run over by a car and they die. Then of course that part's not funny, you know. But up until
Yeah,
that moment, it's hilarious, you know.
I
So,
know it's true. It's true though. I mean, it's like whether you're 2 years old or 102 years old, still somebody slipping on a banana peel is a funny thing.
well, yeah, it's hilarious, but you know, but
Lucky
again,
you.
until the person gets injured, then it's not so funny.
Yeah, you're a comedian. You're an actor. You're a writer, and you're a producer, and you're putting together the Danforth Comedy Festival, as I mentioned at the outset, August 4th to the 6th, and then again August 11th to the 12th. Talk to me about who is on the bill.
Yeah,
People we
so
would know.
we've got a bunch of great headliners. We have Nathan McIntosh. He's originally from Halifax, but lived in Toronto here for a while, and he's been on the Tonight Show and doing amazing things. He's in New York City right now. He's going to be in town. We have Crystal Ferrier. She's recently on she was on season 1 and season 2 of Roast Battle on CTV
Hmm.
comedy, and we have Frank Spadone, Sean Cullen, you know, amazing acts. We also have for improv, we actually have an improv show where there's a couple come in from Columbus, Ohio. They originally from Chicago, where they get a suggestion from the audience and they build a 45-minute musical play in with singing, and it's incredible, just like phenomenal.
Wow.
I've seen them many times, and every time it's mind-boggling that they've just done exactly what they just did, you know.
How do you go about putting together these kinds of shows? Like, what do you look? I mean, obviously, you want to have it as well rounded as possible, but is there a basic criteria?
Funny. I mean,
Yeah,
that's we
okay, I
want.
was gonna,
we
that
want
makes it.
we
Yeah,
want people to be funny. I think, like, so for Comedy Nuggets, the slogan is, you know, guaranteed good night out, right? I think that for me, at the end of the day, you know, obviously people are always mindful of how much they pay for things, but I think that what we're really mindful is that you can never get time back, and we want to have a good time. I want to make sure that when people come to any show for Comedy Nuggets, and this festival is included, that it's a good time, that people have had like it's hilarious, that the acts, and so it makes a well-rounded show, right? So when I create the show as a product, because, like, again, it goes back to me being a product manager. Like, it's a product in itself. I want all aspects of the show to work well together: the host, the headliner, the people in the middle, etc. So that's really what I'm looking for.
is it difficult being a comedian? Dealing with comedians from a business level because you're thinking to yourself, okay, I know as a comedian this is what you deserve, but as a producer, this is all I can pay you. There's that internal conflict, if you know what I'm saying.
Of course, of course, of course. I mean, yes, I mean, so first of all, I try and pay comedians as much as I can without losing my shirt. That's kind of
Yeah,
my
yeah.
motto. And I mean, and like to your point, I mean, first and foremost, I'm a comedian, so I would never want to underpay comedians to the point where it wouldn't make sense for me either, right? I mean, because I don't want to establish some sort of, like, anything that suggests that how much people should get paid poorly, for example, right?
Yeah.
So I'm really cognizant of that. I try to pay. I mean, things are complicated, right? There's all kinds of other costs at play, and so I do know that at times comedians feel as though they should be getting paid more. Of course, you know,
Yeah, and it's a tight community too. I mean, it's a big country, but
of course,
the comedy community is a pretty tight community. And when the word gets out, hey, that Luke guy's pretty cheap, or he's very
that's
fair, or
right.
he's very generous, then that's the
Yeah.
kind of things that bring you down or keep you afloat, as it were,
Well, in anything you
business
do in
wise.
life, reputation is very important. So
Yeah.
I want to treat people well. My first objective is I want to treat the comedians well and have a great show. That's what I'm looking for.
What's your next moves after this? You've got any thoughts of like going into film, like writing doing a film? Have you thought about that?
Well, actually, in 2011, I actually produced an improvised short film, which I haven't edited yet. So I want to edit that. Everything else kind of just took over. Like all kinds of other things kind of took over. So I want to edit that. I'm actually attempting at the moment to get more kind of social like followers and things like that. So producing more content for online. I think that's my next step.
Yeah, good stuff. For people who are interested in going to see some of these acts, August 4th to the 6th or 11th to the 12th, what's the best way for them to get tickets and more information?
Well, the website, it's at danforthcomedyfestival.com, or they can go on Instagram, Danforth Comedy Festival. That's the account there as well.
Okay, good stuff. I wish you all the best, and it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you for taking the time to do so.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
That's going to do it for another week, and thanks very much for tuning in. We appreciate it very much. And again, go to our website, www.tedwallishin.ca. You can check out all our past podcasts, and we're open for any suggestions you may have for guests or any comments that you may have or any questions. There's an opportunity for you to do that as well, and we welcome that. And while you're online, make sure you fill out your organ and tissue donation card. You could change or even save a life. In the meantime, have a great week.
The Ted Wallachin Podcast has been brought to you by ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. And Tom's Place, for the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices. It's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. The Ted Wallachin Podcast is produced by Becky Coles, that's me. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. To talk to Ted and for more information on his podcast and our sponsors, go to www.tedwallishin.ca.